gotta hand it over to another Rockstar panel with Vlad Cuesta hosting. Vlad, how are you, my friend?
Hi there. I was about to say hello, party people, but that's for the wrong podcast.
No, actually, HCPP is a really, really big party, if you think about it. And we're having a blast here in Meatspace for sure. And it's awesome to get all of you from cyberspace involved as well. So Vlad, unfortunately, couldn't come. And neither could Jonas Nick, Blockstream cryptographer and wizard of Bitcoin, even though he doesn't have a long beard. That's a good disguise, actually. Jonas, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. Good to be here. Took me a while to set this up technically because being a real cypherpunk, I don't do that very often. And my microphone broke, my driver didn't work. So I hope this will now work out for the next hour.
Well, we are up and running, and I see you got your coffee too. Plus the whiteboard in the background, as any good hacker should.
Yeah, that's for my own safety. If I fail to understand concepts correctly, then this whole whiteboard might be able to help me.
Yes, fantastic. Vlad, take it over.
Oh yeah, this is the Bitcoin takeover, baby. So I take over. That's the expression. But do you hear me well? Because I didn't get to do a proper mic check, and I'm not sure if the level is right or I'm louder than Jonas.
Yeah, I hear you well.
Okay. I usually do this testing before I get into conversations. This is Season 6, Episode 9, being recorded live with Jonas Nick. I wasn't sure if your name isn't Nick Jonas, and I was about to crack a joke about the Jonas brothers and where are Joe and what's the other one, Kevin or something.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. I'm not really responsible for that name. But yeah, still sorry for that. And I don't know, it helps my anonymity set, because if you Google my name, you usually find like this one guy from the Jonas Brothers instead of me, which of course has its advantages and also disadvantages.
Oh yeah, Max called us rock stars, but you have the name of a rock star and you work for a rock star company. And I suppose we should talk about what Sergey said about Blockstream people in the previous panel. And he was kind of, dismissive of the idea that people want to work for Blockstream and that you are wizards who seek for complexity for the sake of getting more funding. Or I'm not sure if that was the point. I wish he was still around to make it clear. But what is it like to work for Blockstream? Is it as obscure and occult as people claim it to be?
I mean, Blockstream today is not that small of a company anymore. We're more than 60 people. I work mostly with the research team, and I'm very happy to work with that team. Is it obscure and occult? I don't think so, because occult often means like doing things in secret, and the Blockstream research team does very few things in secret. Most of the things we do is actually in public on GitHub, etc. But I mean, one of our problems is that like everyone calls us wizards, and this gives us a certain aura, and this actually has the effect that people don't want to apply because they think you need to be a wizard to be at Blockstream. But I think the answer to that is everyone can be a wizard.
That's a nice way of putting it. And I suppose there's a lot of talent that doesn't necessarily want to work at Blockstream, but should work on Bitcoin project and on the base layer and optimizations. And I happen to have taken a look at your resume, and I'm quite impressed. And I want to talk to you about this philosophy of making transactions smaller. So instead of making blocks big to fit more transactions that are likewise big, you're working on aggregation of signatures that will make transactions a lot smaller in these small blocks. And I hope I didn't say anything stupid with aggregation of signatures, because I saw the look on your face, but I'm going to let you explain.
Yeah, so I think the general idea is that what we're doing right now in Bitcoin isn't very efficient, and there are ways to make it more efficient, and these ways aren't very contentious in the community, so we should just do them. And one of these things is the new encoding of signatures in BIP Schnorr and BIP Taproot, because right now signatures are more than 70 bytes, and by having a new encoding scheme we can reduce that to 64 bytes, and that's a very simple fix that has some effect. And we can do more with that. Like one of these things that we've been working on at Blockstream in particular is this idea of music, where we are able to aggregate public keys into a single public key. And this will be supported by BIP Schnorr as well, and will be useful for multi-signatures. And then the next step will be what you were talking about, this idea of signature aggregation. And for that, you need a verification algorithm that's different to normal Schnorr signature verification. So this is not in BIP Schnorr, but something we'll certainly be working on in the future.
This is definitely fascinating, and I'm happy that you mentioned Taproot and Schnorr, because they have been discussed for quite some time. They have been in review, and I suppose the time is right to try some activation. I saw some Reddit posts by Greg Maxwell, who is explaining that this situation is already in a very advanced phase. And how do you regard Taproot right now? What is the current state of it?
So the current state is that the cryptography parts have been recently merged, and now the question is of merging this pull request to Bitcoin Core that actually deals with this new output format. So right now the output format is SegWit version 1, and the new one with BIP Taproot will be wrong. The current one is SegWit version 0, and the new one will be version 1. And the code to actually understand how to spend these outputs, that's currently just a pull request, and that is being reviewed. And I haven't seen much active discussion there recently. And I have not reviewed this PR. I was mostly involved with cryptographic parts, and I know that some people reviewed this PR very closely and have written tests for it and done even some, let's say, obscure but useful testing strategies like mutation testing on it. And so I'm relatively confident, even without looking at the code, that this might actually work. But I'm not so sure about the Bitcoin Core policies for merging these PR. So maybe they're just waiting for some final X on that PR from reputable people. Yeah. But it's certainly a good time to talk about activation strategies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know, Jonas, that is. If I could point out one specific question here, Jonas, and that is, by the way, how is my connection coming through? Am I lagging?
Works very well.
Okay, works very good. So the question is, you know, as you said, these the pull requests are very high quality, both in the code as well as in the review and all the testing and so on. But still, there's it seems that this is taking quite some time for further activation or merging. So you said that you had some quarrel with the Bitcoin Core process here. Where do you see some problems, and how do you think that it can be improved?
The thing is that I'm not really actively working on Bitcoin Core, or I'm only working on a sub-project of Bitcoin Core, namely the cryptographic library, and I know how that works. So I don't have any problems with the Bitcoin Core PR policies and whatnot. I just don't know how they work. And the thing why it's taking so long is not due to some Bitcoin Core policies. It's just that this stuff just takes time, and there are not that many people working on it, and many people have other things to do as well. And like in the Bitcoin world, Taproot is very interesting, but it's not the most interesting happening all the time. So people work on other things too, and there were some improvements to
Max? Jonas?
Yes, hello. There seems to have been some realignment of the Jitsi. I hope Jonas can drop in back in just a sec.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it's my connection or something has happened on your side.
Yeah, I think that it is on my side, but I will check some further things. So Jonas is back. Fantastic. Please continue.
Hello. When was I disconnected?
Well, Vlad, maybe you can pick up with the next question. You had something.
Yeah. So you're describing the inefficiencies with Bitcoin Core, and I think part of the answer that I got was that you don't work directly in Bitcoin Core or actively, and you work on a different project. And after that, I think I kind of lost the plot. But I was about to ask you something which is very much relevant for this conference, because we are speaking as if we are at Breaking Bitcoin or something, but there are people in the audience listening right now, and maybe that they don't know much because this isn't a Bitcoin only conference per se. It's more of a hackers congress, and there may be people who know nothing about all of these improvements that are to be made in Bitcoin. So how do you describe Taproot and Schnorr signatures in very simple terms?
Oh, that's a good question, and I am the wrong person to ask that. But I can still try. Like as I said earlier, there's a lot of things in Bitcoin that we can still optimize, and one of the things that we optimize with Taproot in particular is that, let's say you have a coin and there's a certain spending policy for that coin. And by spending policy, I mean something like Alice must provide a signature to spend that coin, or Bob must provide a signature, or Charlie and David must provide a signature. So I mean policies, and sometimes this is also referred to as smart contracts. Now, one of the inefficiencies that we see is that even if, or let's say it like that, you can satisfy this policy without showing the policy. So you can say, here, I'm Alice, I provide a signature, and then I can spend the coin without showing the rest of this policy to the world. And this allows us to have smaller transactions, which are cheaper. We can put more of them in a block, but also makes Bitcoin more fungible, because then we don't have to show the whole policy to the world, only a small part of it. So this is the idea behind Taproot. And so Taproot, I think, was first proposed beginning of 2019, I think. And this was like an additional optimization of the proposals that have existed before for doing this this thing with only showing part of the policy, where you can do it in a really optimized way, where you have one default spending path. And this one is very efficient. It's just a single public key, and you can spend the coin by providing a signature for that public key. But inside that public key, a more complicated policy can be hidden. So if you need something like after time T, then a different set of signers can spend this coin, then you can have that hidden in a public key and nothing else. And this is like the main idea behind Taproot, that you can hide the policies inside a public key itself.
Yeah, so let me try to give an example if I understood well. Let's say that I'm going to have children soon, and I want to give my son 0.1 Bitcoin when he turns 18 or when he becomes literate enough to sign the transaction himself. And I put these two conditions in a multisig, and whichever one of them gets fulfilled is going to be written in the blockchain. But the final writing on the public blockchain is not going to contain all the conditions that I have set. It's going to look just like every other transaction. Did I get that right?
Yes, until spending time. So you have one default path, and if it's spent with the default path, then it looks like a normal payment. But if you need to use another path, for example, something like after time t, after your son is 18, then you have to show that this path was actually committed to in that public key, and then you have to reveal it. But if there are more spending policies, you don't have to reveal them. You only have to reveal a single one. And yeah, that's one of the main things in Taproot. The other main thing is that in Taproot, we also switch to the Schnorr signature scheme instead of ECDSA, which means that we can actually, in this single public key, the default spending path, we can actually realize a multisig policy. And how that works is that if you have Alice, Bob, and Charlie, you can say, okay, let's create a 3 of 3 multisig. Or perhaps a better example are Lightning channels, because that is like an immediate use case. So you have a Lightning channel between Alice and Bob, and a Lightning channel always has needs to have some kind of multisig coin with Alice and Bob. And right now you have Alice and Bob's public key in the chain, and that shows the world that this is like a multisig setup, which is bad, and it's also more expensive because you have to actually write the public key, both public key and both signatures in the chain. And with a switch to Schnorr signatures, you can simplify this, because what you can essentially do is just add up Alice and Bob's key, and then in order to sign it, both need to create a partial signature, and then they can add up this partial signature to get a final signature. And then they have this combined key, which looks like a normal key, a combined signature, which looks like a normal signature. They can spend the coin, and it looks like any other payment, but it required cooperation between Alice and Bob, and no one can know about this from just looking at the blockchain. It's like a second big improvement with BIP Taproot.
That definitely sounds fascinating, and I look forward to activating it on my node. Even if I don't use the features, I still think it's worth supporting for the sake of pushing Bitcoin development forward. And I was about to mention that a lot of people look into what else is happening in the space right now, and they say, oh, Bitcoin has been the same for such a long time. There's nothing going on. There's no development. There are very few developers. Look at Ethereum. They have thousands of developers or whatever. They have DeFi, and look at this yield farming scam and whatever. And how do you actually convince people that this is not, I don't know which example I should give, maybe Android development, where it's a good idea to have all sorts of developers working on your platform and do stuff independently. But with Bitcoin, you're supposed to be conservative and make sure that you don't break anything. And when you make a change, it should be very well written, and it should not break consensus. And with decentralized systems in general, you should be very cautious. We have had bad experiences in 2010, and the worst one, I think, was in 2013 with that accidental hard fork that happened. And essentially, one of the goals of Bitcoin development is to allow Satoshi to return at any point and spend his coins, right? We don't want to move to another chain, which makes it impossible for Satoshi to move his coins.
Yeah, I don't think I'm not sure if that will ever work, because at some point it's possible that we have actual quantum computers. And then it would be possible for anyone with a quantum computer to spend Satoshi's coins. But in general, if people say that Bitcoin is somewhat slow in development, I mean, that's true, I think, and that's a good thing, but that only concerns the base layer. I think everything else moves very quickly, at least in my perspective. I have no idea about all the things that happen in the Lightning Network, for example, and all the things that happen in the hardware wallet multi-signature space. I view Bitcoin and altcoins just as qualitatively different things. So one thing is censorship resistant, and the other things are try to do something else and perhaps don't try to be money, and perhaps they do interesting experimentation for sure, and they're better and worse altcoins, of course. So I think the answer to that would be just that these things are not really comparable.
Okay, so let's get back to something that you actually do and concerns your everyday work. On your website, which is called nickler.ninja, you have a proposal to reduce the transaction sizes of Bitcoin with X-only pub keys. How would you describe that? And why is it a good idea to reduce transactions and transaction sizes? And how can you do that without breaking consensus?
So the proposal is actually part of the Schnorr proposal. So right now in Bitcoin, public keys, wait, I can perhaps write it down if you see that. So let me see, does it work? Perhaps 33 bytes?
Yeah, I can see.
Perhaps it's easier just to talk about it. So right now in Bitcoin, public keys are usually written to the blockchain in the compressed format, which means they have 33 bytes. And in an initial version of Schnorr, we just kept the same public key format, 33 bytes. And but we knew that you could actually remove the first byte, because the first byte is just a single bit saying on which side of the curve the corresponding point is. So this would get very deep. So let's perhaps not go there. So while working on Schnorr, we thought, well, I mean, we're thinking about this new proposal now. Why don't we make it simpler and remove this first byte? So this is what we're doing now. It doesn't really add a lot of complexity. I mean, I think it just adds one additional check somewhere. And by that you save 1 byte. It's just something we did along with Schnorr, and then the blog post also goes into detail of how to show that this is not less secure than having 33 bytes public keys.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Jonas, that was actually
why do you think? Oh, there's Peter Todd. Oh my God.
We just expanded the panel conversation. Peter Todd magically appeared. I wrote him like 2 days ago, inviting him to come on the TV at like 2 a.m. Prague time, which is this evening. He confirms everything, right? I aligned the schedule. All of a sudden, 5 minutes later, he says, Max, fuck it. I bought a plane ticket. I will be there on Friday. And now he's sitting here. So
like
how are you supposed to organize something when you have crazy freedom-loving people like Peter?
And that's Alekos Filini.
anything.
Yes, and Alekos as well. So I bring these two on specifically because I think they're well, first of all, great Bitcoin contributors, and you know, specifically Alekos is working on the Magical Bitcoin wallet, which is really cutting edge on many of the technical fronts. I consider as one of the next generation wallets, and we spoke about Taproot, right, and how that type of new wallet might work with Taproot. So maybe you can speak a couple things about that specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not like a Taproot expert, so I don't know the crypto details. In general, yeah, for my project, which actually it was called Magical Bitcoin Wallet until a couple of weeks ago. Now it's been renamed with BDK because we merged with BDK guys. So yeah, now it's
what does BDK stand for?
It's Bitcoin Dev Kit. It was a project started by Steve Myers. Maybe you've heard about it. And yeah, it was originally called BDK and Mine Magical. Now we've merged them together, but the name BDK remained. So yeah, speaking of Taproot, it's definitely something I'm looking at, because the goal of BDK is basically to make a library that can support potentially any kind of wallet, like generalized scripts, different spending policies and conditions. So Taproot is definitely a good thing for that, especially in terms of privacy. So right now, if you want to do like a very complex wallet, you're going to have a very specific on-chain like footprint, because you can see scripts that are very, very particular. So yeah, definitely looking into Taproot. I don't know how yet, so we're going to try. Probably people smarter than me that they know the crypto, we're going to try to make it work somehow. Yeah.
Okay, so we have two Taproot experts. I suppose we should make them discuss and debate on something. Is there anything that you guys disagree on?
Yes. Well, Peter disagrees with most everything. What are your disagreements with Taproot? Where do you have your quarrels with it?
Well, I think the biggest quarrel is I haven't really read much about it. And, I mean, I've been focusing on client-side consensus stuff for quite a while, so I haven't really paid too much attention to it.
But, even for clients as validated state, I think Taproot is still a major improvement with multiple things like public key tweaks and so on.
Yeah, and I think, like, reusing it as a module really, and then any of the stuff I do is certainly going to happen. But it's one of those things where kind of let it take a while to gel and so on. And most stuff I've been doing has been written in Rust, so of course I'm waiting for a Rust implementation to happen.
Yeah.
And then we'll argue about consensus and so on, whether or not the two implementations match. But at some point I'll probably wind up using that.
Mm-hmm. Isn't there already a Rust implementation out there? Does anyone know?
There's a Rust implementation of the crypto parts, and they're right now also including the new BIP Schnorr things. I think it's called Rust SecP 256K1, but it doesn't include consensus parts. And if it was, you shouldn't use it, of course.
Yeah. Okay, Glenn?
Oh, so I'm the one who's supposed to save this awkward silence moment. Okay, so let's get back on track. I wanted to ask Jonas about his work on Nix Bitcoin, because I think that's unique, and I'm not sure if he's the maintainer of that repository, but I don't know many people who use NixOS, so I think that's definitely special.
Yeah, so I'm the maintainer because I started it, and people verify my signature when they update Nix Bitcoin. So the reason for doing this was, I think, right now there are many Bitcoin node projects which try to bundle like Bitcoin, Lightning, coin joins, and whatnot. And I think they all started with the same problem, that if you try to set this up yourself, your own node, then you want to do it in a way that's reproducible. And perhaps for others to use as well. And this is how Nix Bitcoin got started. Not many people use Nix, that is true. But I like to joke that using NixOS is like the ultimate low time preference move, because it's just so much better than everything else, but it has a steep learning curve. That's like a downside if you really want to tinker with the code. What I looked for was what is the most systematic way to set up a Bitcoin node. And then this whole NixOS thing came up. So I'm really happy with it, and there are other brilliant contributors. This game has levels, because the cool thing about Nix Bitcoin is with NixOS you can treat your infrastructure as code, but it's like real powerful functional code, so you have really powerful abstractions, and you can really abstract the things away pretty greatly. I think we have by far the best tests of any node project. And that's an interesting aspect, I think, because you can just run tests and then everything runs in a container and then execute some Python tests, and you can test multiple configurations and so on. So that's pretty cool. But of course,
all right.
Yeah.
For those of us who haven't looked at Nix much, what's your 30-second elevator pitch for what it actually does that's different?
So Nix itself is a functional package manager that's aimed at being reproducible, and reproducible means something else than what we usually refer to as reproducible in the Bitcoin world. It doesn't mean binary compatible. It just means that it basically pins your dependencies by hash, and then not the same bits, but at least it has the same dependencies. And so this is the main idea behind Nix. And you can use it on any Linux distribution and on Mac as well as an additional package manager to whatever you have if you want to play around with it. And NixOS is an operating system built on top of that idea, which brings that to the next level, because then you just write a single declarative configuration.nix file. You say, in the case of Nix Bitcoin, you say, I want Bitcoin enabled, I want Lightning enabled, I want Tor enforced. You just set these options to true, then you run NixOS build switch, that's the command. And then it completely builds your system according to your configuration.nix. So then that's really cool, because then you can have your whole system configuration in a Git repository, for example, to track it. And you can also roll it back easily, and you can deploy it from other machines easily. So, yeah, but I think...
Well, about these machines. How cross-compatible is it for hardware? Are there going to be some compatibility issues when you run it on different architectures of hardware?
So you can run it on ARM and you can run it on x86, and yeah, it works just like any Linux distribution. I haven't tried anything else yet.
There are only two other people I know that use Nix, and they are Stick from Trezor and an Italian girl whose name is Daniela Brazzoni or something. And I think she works for Stick or something, I don't know. But they are the only ones, and right now I discovered that Jonas also uses it, which I think is interesting. I might try it. I'm a Mint Linux kind of guy, so...
I mean, Nix Bitcoin is more like, you don't really have to understand Nix to use it. You just have to change a configuration file, and that's mostly it. It's just if you want to install a node, and you can start with that. And if you want to go deeper into it, then you can make it your main distribution.
But isn't like cubes though, where you're separating things in virtual machines, or could you use Nix that way?
So I think, so what we're doing in Nix Bitcoin right now, we use heavily containers, but not like Docker, just Linux namespaces and C groups. And because you're essentially programming your system in a functional language, you can use abstractions and you can build your own cubes, basically. Not with a graphical user interface and everything, but at least I think there's even a project which tries to rebuild some parts of cubes with Nix. So that's not too difficult. And we do like a weaker thing. We don't use virtual machines. We use containers right now to really containerize every single system service that we have. We put them in their own network namespace. Then we set up routing rules that only the services who are supposed to talk to each other can talk to each other, etc.
So security-wise, I mean, it'd be as good as the Linux kernel Linux kernel C groups and containerizations stuff. Which, it's so. Yeah. But at least it's reproducible. So if there's an issue with one of your dependency, you at least know exactly what dependencies you have. And it's also like CubesOS, like in a imperative operating system, I would say it's also more, or
perhaps more likely to make mistakes because you misconfigure something, or you configured something the first time, then you don't do it the second time, and etc. So there are trade-offs, certainly.
So NixOS is an operating system, right?
Yes.
But in what language is it written?
It's an operating system built on Linux. It's just another Linux distribution. And some parts are written in Nix, some parts are written in C, I guess. Yeah, that's it.
And one more question for these dependencies. As you said, the dependencies are hashed and kind of ordered. How far down the supply chain basically does it go?
So this is an interesting question. It doesn't go as far as Geeks, for example, GUIX. And Geeks is a bit of a similar project where you really try to get one, binary compatibility, and two, really reduce your trusted base or trusted computing base, which I think are interesting goals, but the Geeks community is very small right now, and I think there's no reason why Nix couldn't do similar things as Geeks, and both projects could profit from each other. And so yeah, how far does this go? This goes very far. So you basically pin every dependency, and this recursively pins every other dependency, and so forth.
You seem content, Max. I'm happy that you got your answer.
Yes, actually, no, that's a very good answer. So I'm happy.
I'm actually excited that I get to have so many developers at the same time. And I wanted to ask you guys, each one of you, so Jonas and Peter and Alekos, what is the Bitcoin project on which you're not working that gets you most excited and you see most potential in it?
Who's gonna start?
Yeah, go on, let's go.
I don't know. I mean, one thing that kind of fascinates me is Lightning in general, like the whole ecosystem. I would like to learn more and play with it more, I would say. I don't know about potential because I mean, there are drawbacks, but it can definitely grow from where we are now. But yeah, I would definitely like to have more time to spend on Lightning stuff in general, because they're really, really cool and also moving pretty fast. So yeah, it's hard to kick off.
Yeah, I made a tactical mistake there, letting him answer first, because, you know, I mean, I just used Lightning, 3 times today to actually do useful things, and it works. I mean,
magic.
I can't say that of much of the stuff I've done. Open timestamps works, but it doesn't have the same satisfaction as, you know, buying a beer.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty magical, like how far it's kind of come.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
you know, maybe some interesting things too is figure out more trade-offs about, you know, how do you get payments to go through faster? You know, how do you make them more reliable to go through? And there's a lot of different space there. Of course, you know, one of what people are doing is just adding trust to that, and those trusted solutions are working pretty well, modulo the trust.
Yeah, that's always the thing, right? There's layers and trust trade-offs, obviously. And for me, Lightning is a natural answer, but to be more specific, actually, I would say Alekos is a magical Bitcoin wallet or a Bitcoin development kit. Because for me, it packages all these new awesome things that we've built over the last couple of years into a next generation wallet. And that is so powerful. And I think it will really just realign what we actually think of as a wallet to quite a big extent. So mini script, output script descriptors, and PSBT, that together is a big paradigm shift. So I'm super excited for that.
Thanks.
What about you, Jonas?
Can I give 2 answers? So the first one would just be a usable multisig. So I see there's a lot of progress there, because I want to finally use multisig in a more user-friendly way, and not just for geeks and without any danger of somehow not finding your coins anymore. So that's one thing I'm excited about. And the other thing I'm excited about is this specific concept of dual funding in Lightning, where right now, if you open a channel with someone, you only use your own coins, and the idea of dual funding would be that both parties provide inputs to the funding transaction, and that way you have a coin join. But even better, if you use that channel and later close it, then the input and output amounts will be uncorrelated, so you can have an unequal amount coin join, which right now, at least in my opinion, is quite a difficult thing to do correctly.
Yes.
And that's a good point too, how like even without any more scripting group and so on, I mean, Lightning channels look like normal multisig when they go through the normal processes. And, you know, right there, you've done so much to confuse analysis.
Yeah.
And things like that just, you know, leverage that even further.
Yeah, no, and then as Jonas said, this is a small coin join, so the common input ownership heuristic is broken. And specifically because we have uncertainty about which channel state is being published, right? The amounts are very difficult to correlate to. And now if you combine that with channel factories, that's, I think, going to be like very, very interesting, right? With having actually more than two people providing these inputs, and you know, could potentially have hundreds of inputs in a channel factory opening. That's really going to confuse surveillance quite a bit.
Well, you know, an interesting point with all this is, I remember from last year, I saw this point at the presentation, how you can have a lot of variety in what exactly Lightning channels are between, you know, two entities. You know, one really seemingly crazy example being, well, you and I can operate a channel with a negative balance, as in I actually owe you money. But, you know, with a business relationship, that can make a lot of sense. It's just, you know, fancy accounting, and it's not just the Bitcoin in the channel that's kind of securing it. But when you add that to, say, big entities creating these kinds of arrangements to make a bit more money on the routing fees and so on, well, what that'll look like to the rest of the network, it can just look like, well, we have two connections, but they're synthetic. You know, they don't actually match what's on the chain. And again, it's just yet another way that you're losing, you know, you're losing data because you don't have insight into any of this. I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer myself, but it could be interesting to have capability in the Lightning Network to have, you know, data published about channel connections that doesn't actually mention anything about the pub keys or any of that, or route points or so on, just to, you know, have that ability. Because, I mean, after all, in some cases, you know, maybe you're ready through Tether for all you know. You know, maybe Blockstream Liquid.
And I think that or Vlad, please continue.
Yeah, I was about to ask Jonas to provide the second answer to the question because he only gave us one.
Oh, there were two answers. One was like just multi-sig user experience, and the other thing is dual-funded Lightning channels.
Okay, I'm stupid. I admit it. That's why I don't work for Blockstream or something. But anyway, what is your guys' take on coin joins? Because I see a lot of debates in regards to their efficiency, and are they in their current state efficient, or should one use them to gain anonymity, or should we wait for more improvements to be made, as you said, with uneven amounts that get coin joined?
Well, I mean, I'm the guy who actually came up with the name CoinJoin, so I'll be kind of the first to go say, you know, CoinJoin isn't that important compared to things like Lightning. But at the same time, I mean, all this debate about how inefficient they are and stuff, I think misses the point of how, you know, once you have good software and sort of good kind of economics, good community, if you will, you can always use CoinJoin to make things more efficient. For the simple factor that, you know, if you and I need to go make a payment and we can arrange a coin join, well, we can avoid the header on the transaction. You know, right there you save a couple bytes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's with the Bitcoin protocol right now. So it will always be more efficient if you can make it convenient.
Yeah.
Now, some of these coin joins might not actually save any money, but there certainly are opportunities here to make it useful. And it's just a matter of, well, how do you exploit them?
Yeah.
I think where the inefficiency comes in is, well, do I want to do a coin join, say, make my coins private? I'd probably be better off, throwing them in a Lightning channel and writing through there instead. Or, frankly, like throwing it on Zcash from Arrow. That'll give you better guarantees than for, less money than a lot of the coin join usage.
Yeah, I think all very good points, and it's a bit tricky, right? Because as you said, making a payment in CoinJoin is usually where we get a lot of where we can potentially get a lot of efficiency gain. But so far, the only CoinJoin implementation that does this is JoinMarket, right?
Yeah.
And even for here, only one user out of the CoinJoin can do the payment. Only the taker, not the makers.
There's a big join, which is kind of in between. Like, this is much smaller than CoinJoin. But
I'm pretty sure with JoinMarket, there is actually a mode where you can say, I need to do this payment and just do it eventually. But, I can't imagine many people actually use it. But, say if I wanted to, put some of my income off to an exchange, that would be a perfect use case. Because, I know rent's going to be paid in a week and I can wait.
Yeah.
Not a common thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, for example, in Wasabi specifically, one of the issues is that it's not a payment contract, right?
Yeah.
Because it relies on zero-link. It relies on, it must have equal amounts on the cryptographic coordination layer. Otherwise, there is no privacy. And this is a big downside because now you cannot make a payment. You have to coin join to yourself and then make a payment. So instead of just having one payment transaction, you have two, right? So this is inherently more inefficient. And then the question is, how do you structure this type of coin join rather efficiently? And so what Wasabi cautiously chose here was a high anonymity set, so a large base of users, so that the transaction ID overhead becomes, like, we use that a lot, as well as batching different coin join pools. So in Wasabi, there's a 0.1 pool, a 0.2, 0.4, 0.8, 1.6, 3.2 exponential. And all of these could be independent pools, each creating their own transaction, where there's only the 0.2 or only the 0.8 or what. But in Wasabi, this is batched. So under one transaction, all of these pools are batched, and then we get the efficiency of transaction batching. So these are two of the things that we considered in the early the Wasabi design, but it's far from efficient and cheap. It will probably still cost you a lot more. First on on-chain fees, but then you also have to consider coordination fees, which specifically in JoinMarket can be actually quite expensive.
It's probably even worse for people that have different wallets that they have to make one first transaction to send to Wasabi, then one transaction to enjoy, and then another transaction to get everything else.
Yes, yeah.
It gets pretty small.
Yeah.
And I think that might be a little underappreciated by many people, how, and you see this in Lightning wallets, like, you really want your wallet to be able to support many different things, purely to avoid having to do many transactions, get things in there.
Which is also why output script descriptors, right, are so important, because now you can kind of import just one private key specifically from that wallet into another and then sign.
Yeah, probably the problem there is also the different scripts. Basically what I was saying before, Taproot here would do that, because if I make a coin join, I'm the only one with 3 or 5 multi-sig, and then I send something to another 3 or 5 multi-sig, then it's probably easier to link people. So Taproot here really has, because every input, even if it's a kind of strange wallet with time blocks or even just a simple multi-sig, they would all look the same.
Yeah. I'm interested for Jonas' answer actually.
So I must admit I'm not that knowledgeable about coin joins, and then because I know that's today a huge field, and but I've never been really convinced that it works so great, I must admit. I've talked earlier about saving 1 byte, so I don't really like making more transactions than you have to for getting your anonymity set. I hope in the future that, but this is the far future, that Bitcoin can advance to a state where coin joins are really, really usable. I mean, one fix is confidential transactions, but that's very hard to get into Bitcoin, probably, to Bitcoin itself. I want to shill Nix Bitcoin again because we recently added join market. So I'm going to play with coin joins at least soon because I wanted to have DeFi on Nix Bitcoin and get my yield with join market by providing liquidity. And I think one thing that people who are interested in this should look at is this wabi-sabi idea by Wasabi. I'm a really big fan of that because that allows you to split your inputs and outputs you provide to the mix in a way where the coordinator doesn't learn about it. And more importantly, I think also in the context of HCPP, because I know that a lot of people are talking about that, is with the same scheme, Wabi-Sabi, you can build really efficient anonymous Bitcoin banks. So that's, I think, a cool side benefit of this Wabi-Sabi idea.
Yes, and I gotta give Jonas credit here because we were researching Wabi-Sabi now for a year and a half or so, and we were at the point where we found out what we want to have, so that the user can register multiple inputs without revealing them on the communication layer to the coordinator. He can register multiple outputs without linking each of them to the same user as well, and the coordinator must not link inputs to outputs, right? And so we had that figured out that this was what we want, and we didn't know the crypto for it. So we got Jonas on one of the research calls, and he was like, yes, signal paper, key verified anonymous credentials, that works perfectly. And it was a solved case, and since then we've kind of refined it and implemented it. So thanks, Jonas, for actually coming up with that.
Yeah, I just did the easy parts. I mean, the hard parts are actually putting the parts together such that they work. And I think people are still implementing it, right?
Yes, the crypto implementation, at least the proof of concept in C# is pretty much done.
Okay.
It's going to be slowly now upgraded with more tests to production-ready code. And we're currently doing a lot of research on transaction structure and graph analysis, which turns out to be much, much more difficult, actually, because there's much more design space, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how are you going to structure one single transaction and then an entire graph of transactions in a way that is efficient and brings decent privacy? It's actually very difficult to come down to an optimal solution. So it's a lot of work still, but 2 weeks.
Can I take a dive into shitcoinery and ask you guys what you think about something which might be a bad idea, but I still want to know why?
Go for it.
So yesterday, Litecoin activated extension blocks with Mimblewimble. And we know what that means if it works on Litecoin. They have been working with a Grin developer, and they want to have it. They want to have a mainnet launch in a couple of months. So why are extension blocks a good or a bad idea? That's the idea that concerns me the most.
I mean, the way I would go put that is essentially that's just a way of doing a protocol upgrade with an increased block size. I think whether or not that's good or bad depends on, ultimately, part of it's, what's increasing block size and can the system likely handle that? I mean, if I owned a pile of Litecoin, one of the things I'd be thinking about is, is this crypto really going to work? Because at some point, assuming this is a soft fork, and I have to look at details there, but it's a soft fork, the amount of coins that go into the Mimblewimble part will eventually get to the point where it's economically relevant, which also means the bug in that is uneconomically relevant. And like it or not, this is a whole bunch of much more complex crypto than Litecoin normally is. And I mean, a sort of standard I like to talk about is, could a drunk fine arts graduate go and figure out how to go audit it? Because I'm a fine arts graduate.
And usually drunk.
And I could not do that for Mimblewimble. And I mean, frankly, no one really can. All they can really do is just audit the math and say, oh yeah, that looks like it works. Whereas it's so easy to go audit the amounts. So this is really a fundamental change in kind of Litecoin's economics. It'll take a while to happen, but it's a big deal. And I couldn't say like Bitcoin should do this because it's unclear how well that math works.
Does anyone know more details on this extension block? Specifically, so you move your Litecoin in this case from regular scripts into Mimblewimble scripts, or in this Mimblewimble extension block. Can you ever spend this Mimblewimble coin with a regular Litecoin script in the output? So can you move out of the extension block back into the base currency?
I mean, if it's a soft fork, we should be able to do that somehow, but I don't really see it.
Well, so the thing is, like with a soft fork in this, the miners would have full insight into the extension block and what's going on and so on. Mm-hmm. And they would essentially just say, well, there's this pool of money that looks like anyone can spend, but if it follows the rule of the Mimblewimble block, we'll then let it go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Which is not unlike, say, Blockstream's liquid thing. It's just replace, miner consensus with a bunch of guys who are pretending to be banks, but we're not going to use the term. And again, like that's the key thing with Mimblewimble. Like, the money locked up in that thing. That because it by default isn't anyone can spend. If the math of the Mimblewimble implementation breaks, it doesn't actually mean the math breaks. It can also mean like there's an exploit. It's just like any of these other things. You can steal money on mass, and bad things can happen. And you want to make sure you actually get this right, or you can see the price of Litecoin crash.
I think it's pretty cool. I wasn't aware of this. I mean, of course, this wouldn't be an option for Bitcoin in the midterm, perhaps in the very long term, because of course on the base layer we do get efficiency improvements, and the hardware gets better and the internet connection gets better. So perhaps at some point we can soft fork in bigger blocks, but that won't be in the next few years, I suppose. So I'm happy that there are projects that are experimenting with this.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting that for once they are doing something different from Bitcoin, as opposed to just being the testnet or copying code that gets developed by Core.
Right.
But I suppose it's relevant in the context of hackers conference, as opposed to breaking Bitcoin or something else that would be hardcore Bitcoin. And I think this is close to the end. It's one.
I will go say, you started this off saying shitcoin, and what Litecoin's doing doesn't quite clearly fit the description.
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have very bad ideas in regards to what Litecoin is and what it does. They consider it basically some sort of inflation for Bitcoin supply, because it's not much different. It has some of the same properties. It doesn't have the same security.
I mean, I think like Adam Back in particular, especially earlier on, he's really pushed the idea of, well, these different coins effectively inflate the supply of Bitcoin. And I don't know, like, I'm not that convinced by that argument, but it doesn't mean I necessarily think an infinite supply of coins is a good thing.
Okay, so I see you're getting water. I want to ask Max if someone else is supposed to come in and take over.
Yeah, it doesn't have yet, so he was asking if somebody else is supposed to come.
Someone is supposed to come. Yes, Pavla Holsova or something. Check names. She's coming soon, in 2 weeks. She will be down here. Let's see, but I actually think maybe already. Yeah, I'm not sure. She will come, for sure.
I mean, I could ask a couple more questions, but I'm trying to be fair and not take up too much time.
Oh, no, that's all right. I think we can make a smooth handover now over the next couple minutes. So, yes. Vlad, any final rapid-fire rounds to finish this up, maybe?
Yeah, so what does it take to become a Bitcoin Core developer, and why should one pursue this goal?
I'm just gonna start by saying that I'm technically not a Bitcoin Core developer because I've never, I don't have any commit in Core or actually in any other major Bitcoin project. I think maybe in C Lightning, but yeah, I don't know. I just think if you like Bitcoin, if you have passion for the topic, just start small, maybe small company, and then try to contribute open source stuff, get people to know you. I don't know. I mean, this is basically what I've done. Guess it work for others too.
I mean, I contributed, quite a few years ago, and then haven't for a while. But based on kind of what I've seen, I'd actually go say, that's kind of the right approach. Like, go find something within the entire ecosystem that makes sense for you. Don't just focus on should I contribute to Bitcoin Core? Frankly, I mean, Bitcoin Core, I don't really want to say stagnated because it's not really true, but it's like the really key things that could be going on. I think it's a smaller share of the entire ecosystem than it used to be. It used to be like.
Good. I mean, it's specialization.
Yeah, it's like
Bitcoin Core is trying to be a node and others.
Yeah, and 5 years ago, there's just more stuff to be done on Bitcoin Core relative to the whole ecosystem. Whereas now, it's just one part of many. I mean, particularly, of course, Lightning. There's more code complexity and stuff in Lightning than all of Bitcoin Core. So, find the thing you're interested in, and don't feel like there's more value on one thing than another. Figure out what excites you and what you're good at.
Yeah. One important thing is that being a general free software contributor, or specifically Bitcoin Core, does not mean that you have to be a coder. Funnily, even officially looking at the Git log, I'm a Bitcoin Core contributor because I fixed a typo in the Taproot pull request to libsecp. So, that counts. But I agree with you. Bitcoin Core is a super important project. It's super important. But the question is, if you contribute to this specific project, is that the most important thing that you can do with your time, right? And in many, many cases, probably the answer is no. Just because the Bitcoin Core process will probably need very specialized knowledge to make a meaningful impact. Sure, maybe some UI work or some test cases and everything.
My own check log time verified patch to Bitcoin Core, which was an upgrade to the consensus. That was probably 5 lines of code, maybe 50 lines of tests, and 2 years or something of politics. The skill set does not look like a normal software project. And frankly, most of what I contributed to with Bitcoin Core was not writing code. It was peer review and analysis and so on. There's much more interesting stuff on my blog than anything I actually directly wrote in Bitcoin Core.
Yeah.
I think too many people see making a commit on Core as some kind of achievement, like a validation. You need to do that, but I don't know. I mean, for me personally, I don't think that this is the case. Maybe I will in the future do something on Core. Maybe I won't. I don't think this is a measurement of how much of a Bitcoin developer I am.
What do you think, Jonas?
Yeah, I think most important, as you've already said, is passion. And the second thing is luck, because you need to find someone who funds you for the things you're passionate about. And there are quite a few people passionate about Bitcoin, and there's only so much funding. So if you don't have that luck immediately, then when you're really passionate about it, then you also need patience, because then you need to constantly reapply, re-ask what can we do, try to get a grant, and then hopefully at one point you'll be able to work on what you want and also get paid. And if you don't get paid and you do it in your free time, that's great too. There are many people who do that, and but don't freak out about it and burn out. That will be my suggestion.
Okay, so I see that the next people, specifically Max, is around and is about to take over. So thank you very much for joining this conversation. I'm very happy that I got to meet you all, because I saw you a year ago in Berlin, and coincidentally I'm wearing the t-shirt that I received during the Lightning conference. And I saw all of you at the Lightning conference, and it's ironic that there's a global pandemic which prevents us from meeting in person right now, but I'm glad that we get to do this. So thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Jonas. Thank you, Peter and Alekos and Max. And I'll see you around. I think I'm going to host tomorrow morning once again, and there's going to be John Carvalho.